is precious. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony on 20 years after 9/11, examining emergency communications. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the subcommittee in recess at any point. Last month, our nation marked 20 years since the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil. The Committee on Homeland Security joined many of our colleagues from New York and New Jersey to visit the National September 11th Memorial and Museum and held a roundtable with first responders. We have also conducted several hearings on the evolution of the Department of Homeland Security and heard from our intelligence community regarding the current and emerging threats to our homeland. Today, the Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery Subcommittee will examine the progress made in emergency communications since September 11, 2001, and discuss the challenges that may still persist today. As you know from emergency managers and first responders who served on September 11th and the 911 Commission report, police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical services experienced significant problems communicating within their own agencies and with others who responded on that day. On the morning of September 11th, I was assigned to the Orlando International Airport as the commander of the Orlando Police Department Airport Police Division. As reports of the attack on the World Trade Center emerged and the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all aircraft grounded, airport and law enforcement leadership had to immediately execute emergency operations to protect passengers, employees, and the public. I know how the first responders felt in Orlando. I can't even begin to imagine all that the first responders on the ground experienced and went through in New York. My husband served in law enforcement as well, and I have 2 sons who are firefighters. My heart continues to go out to the families who lost loved ones that tragic day. Communications and interoperability are essential. First responders consider it their lifeline. Over the next months and years, incredible progress has been made to address the undescribable challenges on September 11th and improve the nation's emergency communications apparatus through programs such as First Responder Network Authority and the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. However, challenges in operability and interoperability still persist, and our aging 911 infrastructure poses additional vulnerabilities. Operability and interoperability remain among the greatest concerns that first responders and public safety officials face. Tragedy and disaster can come, as we all know, in many forms. Climate change also poses significant and growing challenges for emergency communications. From rapid spreading wildfires in the West to increasingly strong and frequent hurricanes, cell towers and radio communication systems remain vulnerable to critical failures. In August, Hurricane Ida, a powerful Category 4 storm, crashed the New Orleans, Louisiana 911 call center and FirstNet Authority, making it difficult, if not impossible, to respond to emergencies. Members of Congress, we know we have an important role in the improvement of emergency communications technology. We must continue to provide funding through grants such as the State Homeland Security Program and the Urban Area Security Initiative. These programs have provided critical federal funding for jurisdictions to buy equipment, build and fix communications towers, and make broadband improvements. While grant programs such as URASI are created specifically for urban areas, we understand that rural communities and tribal lands face their own challenges with broadband and connectivity that can also complicate emergency response. Federal grants support these communities, but can always be more robust to meet the needs more completely. Though communications, interoperability, and resilient infrastructure are priorities for emergency and first responders, the public may only experience their benefit or challenges during times of crisis. Today's hearing will serve as an important forum to understand the current state of emergency communication systems and any gaps that may still persist. I am grateful today for the participation of our witnesses, and I look forward to your testimony. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Kamek, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Demings. I appreciate your leadership on this issue. And as we've said many times before, we are extremely lucky that Florida has two two leaders that are focused on our first responders, emergency preparedness, and have extremely personal ties to this. So thank you again for convening this important hearing today on our first responder communications. As we all know, first responders play an invaluable role in communities across America and ensuring that they have the necessary training, equipment, funding, and resources is a top priority. I look forward to working with the chairwoman to address some of the challenges currently facing our first responders, an issue I know that she cares very deeply about. Now, last month, as we mourned the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, the 9/11 Commission report, which recounts events surrounding that tragic day, calls attention to the fact that the lack of communication among emergency personnel, 911 communication call centers, and individuals in the towers caused confusion, ultimately costing lives. One New York Fire Department chief who was stationed in the North Towers quoted in the report as saying, quote, "People watching on TV certainly had more knowledge of what was happening 100 floors above us than we did in the lobby. Without critical information coming in, it is very difficult to make informed, life-saving critical decisions." I've said this before, my own husband, Matt, he became a firefighter in part because of 9/11, watching 343 men and women run into the towers to save their community members, their neighbors, their coworkers. And I can't imagine, as the wife of a first responder, what it would be like to witness in real time a lack of communication on the ground. Now, fast forward, after first responders experienced similar communication challenges during Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Congress passed the Post Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. This legislation took significant steps to standardize emergency communications across the country by establishing the National Emergency Communications Plan. Now, as a result of the work accomplished by the NECP, a survey conducted in 2018 found that 84% of state and territorial respondents reported significant or some improvement in the strengthening of their communications operability. The Post Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act also helped provide state and local first responders with access to grant funding to develop and implement statewide communication interoperability plans to enhance interoperable communications for public safety and officials at all levels of government. In 2012, Congress took an additional step to improve our nation's emergency communication network by passing the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act. This legislation established the First Responder Network Authority, also known as FirstNet, which is responsible for overseeing the build out and operation of a nationwide interoperable public safety broadband network. This dedicated public safety network has been critical in ensuring that during a disaster, necessary information is able to reach first responders on the ground. While both the Post Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act and the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act made significant improvements to emergency communications, many challenges still remain. One such challenge facing first responder networks is the very real threat of a cyber attack. In fact, a recent survey conducted by SafeCom found that over a third of organizations indicated that cybersecurity incidents have had an impact on the ability of their emergency response providers and government officials' ability to communicate over the past 5 years. The study also found that fire departments and organizations located in rural areas tend to be the least prepared for cybersecurity attacks, with 62% of fire departments indicating that they do not conduct any cybersecurity planning. And over 55% of organizations surveyed indicated that lack of funding is the reason that they do not and cannot invest in cybersecurity. First responders in rural areas like Putnam County, one of my counties in my district, oftentimes do not have the necessary funding to update their technology, or even when they're able to secure the necessary funds, the technology can be unreliable because of a lack of coverage. However, while advances in technology may lead to increases in cyber attacks, technological innovations can also be revolutionary. Next generation 911 enhances the capabilities of today's 911 networks, allowing compatibility with more types of communication to provide greater situational awareness to dispatchers and emergency responders. Next generation 911 will enable 911 call centers to accept and process voice calls, video, photos, and text message from responders and the public. This capability really could be a game changer for those in need and for those responding to the call. As we continue to work to address the challenges facing emergency communications networks to improve the capabilities across the board, we must work to ensure that we are not pursuing a one-size-fits-all approach that may not accommodate the unique needs that many of our communities face, especially those in rural communities. I applaud the progress that has been made to improve first responder communications over the last 20 years, but we have a long way to go. In preparation for today's hearing, I actually spoke with several of my sheriffs, fire chiefs, and emergency managers. Coming from a rural district, several said we are no better today than we were 20 years ago. So today I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on what additional steps we in Congress can take to ensure that our first responders have the information and connectivity to continue serving our communities. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
I want to thank the ranking members, or the ranking member. Members are also reminded that the subcommittee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in their February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. Without objections, members not on the subcommittee shall be permitted to sit and question the witnesses. It is now my honor to welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Chris Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez is the director of the Homeland Security Emergency Management Agency for the District of Columbia, where he serves as the Homeland Security Advisor and State Coordinating Officer. Dr. Rodriguez serves as the State Administrative Agent for all Homeland Security federal grants funding for the district and the National Capital Region. Prior to his current role, Dr. Rodriguez served as the director of New Jersey's Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness from 2014 to 2017. Dr. Rodriguez also serves as a senior analyst in the Central Intelligence Agency's Counterterrorism Center following the attacks of September 11th. Dr. Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Slotkin, to introduce our second witness.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for letting me do a little cameo here. I wanted to do it just to acknowledge Captain Meyer, who is one of your witnesses today. Thank you for allowing me to introduce him. I have the privilege of representing part of Oakland County, Michigan, and Captain Meyer, from Oakland County Sheriff's Office. He commands the Emergency Communication and Operations Division. He's also been one of the foremost advocates for modernizing our nation's emergency communications as chairman of the Public Safety Next Generation 911 Coalition. Captain Meyer is responsible for overseeing radio and 911 emergency communications within the Sheriff's Operations Center and is the Sheriff's communications representative within Oakland County's Homeland Security and Emergency Operations Center. He began his career in law enforcement more than 28 years ago as a patrol officer and with the Garden City Police Department before joining the Oakland County Sheriff's Office in 2009. He is one of our local leaders, described him. Captain Meyer is one of Michigan and the nation's most knowledgeable experts on the subject of emergency communications and has been a, quote, stalwart champion of connecting our first responders and communities over 2 decades. He led the deployment of the text to 911 technology for Oakland County, and he's been at the forefront of developing shared emergency communications in Michigan. So it is my pleasure, just as the representative of part of Oakland County, to welcome him to the committee today.
Representative Slotkin, thank you so much for that introduction. And Captain Meyer, thank you so much for joining us today. Our third witness is Chief Lombard, the Deputy Chief of the Seattle Fire Department. Chief Lombard was a member of the first service who responded to Ground Zero in Manhattan for 2 weeks. Chief Lombard, we thank you so much for your service on that day and your continued service to this day. Chief Lombard has been active in the fire service for nearly 30 years, mainly with the Seattle Fire Department. In addition to 9/11, he has also responded to incidents including the Washington landslide and hurricanes in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Gulf of Mexico. Chief Lombard works in the Seattle Fire Department's Operation Division and 911 Center and manages communications coordination for the department's specialty teams. Chief Lombard, it is an honor to have you with us today, and thank you so much for joining us. The chair now recognizes the ranking member to introduce our fourth witness from the great state of Florida.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I see you chuckling because everyone's been wondering on this call, is Gator actually his name? And I can report that yes, he is named Gator. So it is with a great affection and a pleasure to introduce my friend, but also one of our fantastic sheriffs in North Central Florida, Sheriff Gator Deloach, a lifelong resident of Putnam County. He has had a long career in public service, starting over 20 years ago. Sheriff Deloach has played integral roles throughout his law enforcement career, from sergeant, where he held leadership positions in the drug unit, patrol, and property crimes, to lieutenant of Criminal Investigations Bureau. In January 2017, Sheriff Deloach was sworn in as Sheriff of Putnam County, and we are so lucky to have you in that role. I am honored to be your representative in Congress, and thank you for your continued service to our community, as well as your work on several of the task forces that we have. And so thank you again for your testimony here today, Sheriff Deloach. And again, yes, his name actually is Gator. I yield back.
Thank you to the ranking member, and let this Florida State Seminole welcome you, Sheriff Gator Deloach. Thank you so much to all of our witnesses for joining us today. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each of our witnesses to summarize their statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Dr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Chairwoman Demings, Ranking Member Kamick, members of the subcommittee, and especially greetings to our New Jersey representatives, Bonnie Watson-Coleman and Donald Payne, who worked very closely with when I was the state director in 2014, 2017. My name is Dr. Christopher Rodriguez. I am the director of the DC Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency. And as an appointee of DC Mayor Muriel Bowser, I'm honored to be before this committee to talk about the strides that the District of Columbia has made in emergency communications since the tragic events of 9/11. And when it comes to emergency communications, there's really no place in the country and perhaps in the world like the National Capital Region. With frequent special events and the ever-present threat of disasters, terrorism, the hazard landscape here in the district is unique. We are home to over 40 federal and local response agencies, and we have a robust mutual aid system that spans the Mid-Atlantic region. All of us need to communicate seamlessly and reliably across the whole spectrum of possible contingencies. I think when people often think or talk about emergency communications, they think in terms of radios. But the solutions to these communications challenges that we now face are multifaceted, and they span technologies beyond just land mobile radios. With my time today, I'd just like to discuss a few key solutions, successes, and challenges that are unique to the district. As mobile data and cellular communications become increasingly important elements of effective emergency response, the district first utilized FirstNet for first responders in 2018. And by providing dedicated cellular connectivity for the public safety community, FirstNet enables us to continue sharing voice data and video, even in the face of extreme network congestion. Additionally, our partnership with FirstNet has enabled us to request rapidly deployable cellular infrastructure to support the demands of large events and incidents. Leading up to the 2021 presidential inauguration and on January 6th, we had coordinated with FirstNet to have such infrastructure in place to cover the U.S. Capitol complex. Ultimately, this collaboration and their dedicated bandwidth allowed FirstNet to perform reliably for our first responders at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. We are now in the process of working with FirstNet to acquire 2 of our own compact rapid deployable units, which will contribute to increased resilience and self-sufficiency for the district's emergency communications. And while the ability to communicate between government partners is vital, the ability to quickly reach the public with life-saving information is equally important. There are many ways to quickly push emergency information to the public during a crisis, but a unique challenge to the district is that we receive an extremely high volume of visitors and transient populations. These individuals may not be in the district long enough to sort of learn about our opt-in emergency notification systems or follow our public safety officials on social media. Wireless Emergency Alert, or WEA, has proven to be an incredibly valuable resource in our public alerting and warning toolbox. And my agency has been both a regional and national leader in the WEA space since it was tested before the 2017 presidential inauguration. Following this successful first test, which was the first of its kind in the nation, our staff were asked to share best practices on alerting procedures with our state, local, tribal, territorial, and even FEMA partners. But while WEA is a powerful tool, it's not without its limitations. We still see challenges with the accuracy of geofencing, which can lead to bleed over outside of our intended target area. It's also a very high profile alerting method, and its overuse or inappropriate use can lead individuals to opt out of the service, which would limit our ability to reach them in a dire emergency. We did use WEA during and announcing curfews during the Black Lives Matter protests and the January 6th insurrection, as well as with other extreme weather events. So improving the interoperability and reliability of emergency communications here in the district is a top priority for us, and I know for the mayor. And I appreciate the opportunity to share these experiences with the subcommittee. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez, for your testimony. I now recognize Captain Meyer to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Deming, Ranking Member Kamick, and thank you to Congresswoman Slotkin for that introduction and members of the subcommittee. I am Mel Meyer, a captain in Oakland County, Michigan Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff of Oakland County, Michael J. Bouchard, is a member of the Major County Sheriffs of America, MCSA, and I offer my comments today on behalf of other members represented by that association. I will spend a minute each on 4 issues: radio communications interoperability, 911 systems, FirstNet, and iPause. I look forward to your questions afterwards. Overall, 20 years after the 9/11 attacks, we've made a lot of progress in emergency communications, but there is still more to be done. We need to meet the needs and expectations of the American people in the 21st century. The ability to communicate and coordinate via radio networks is essential, no matter the type of incident we are responding to, whether it is a highway crash, an active shooter, a wildfire, hurricane, or terrorist attack. Since 9/11, more advanced radio features and technologies have improved interoperability between public safety agencies. Funding from the Department of Homeland Security's UASI and state Homeland Security grant programs has helped us improve infrastructure and get responder devices into the field. However, barriers to radio communications technology growth and interoperability still exist. There still remains at times lack of coordination and interoperability among agency communication systems. Due to the varying levels of radio technology, system maturity, and continued reliance upon legacy proprietary systems. Additional federal funding would help us accelerate the move to modern systems and true interoperability. It would help agencies implement technologies that can bridge those different communication networks, enabling data and voice interoperability. Regarding 911, we are on the verge of seeing next generation 911 become much more widely deployed across the United States. Next generation 911 was developed to address long-standing issues with legacy 911 systems. This technology is like FirstNet. However, without federal funding, many jurisdictions will not be able to transition to NG 911 anytime soon. This will create a patchwork of haves and have-nots, resulting in uneven capabilities throughout the United States. And that's not fair to the responders or to the citizens. Some 911 centers will achieve NG 911, while others, especially those in rural areas, will not have the means. The Public Safety Next Generation 911 Coalition includes many of the leading organizations in the country representing fire, EMS, law enforcement, and emergency communications professionals. We are advocating for a one-time commitment of $15 billion in federal grant funding to support a nationwide transition to NG 911. MCSA strongly believes this once-in-a-generation investment will allow the successful deployment of NG 911 nationwide. It improves emergency response. It saves lives. With regards to FirstNet, the 9/11 Commission recommended establishing an interoperable nationwide broadband network dedicated solely to first responders. Through this leadership of the public safety community and Congress, we now have FirstNet, a reliable, dedicated, nationwide high-speed network solely for first responders. Since FirstNet's creation, coverage and capacity have consistently improved. There is a dedicated network core that is completely focused on public safety. There are now over 2.5 million FirstNet connections across 17,000 public safety agencies and other organizations. And the FirstNet Authority is looking further ahead towards 5G connectivity for public safety in its dedicated core. At the same time, the success of FirstNet ultimately depends on continued investment in the development of reliable coverage and capacity throughout the United States. The network's rollout has been fast by any standard, and there is still progress to be made. Congress should continue to ensure that the FirstNet Authority gets the support it needs to realize the full promise of FirstNet. And finally, with regard to IPAWS, FEMA has simplified the system, improved the ability to quickly reach more in the public. In my home state of Michigan, during the COVID pandemic, we utilized IPAWS to provide information on public health orders and other recommendations, which resulted in successfully messaging important public health emergency information. At the same time, there are opportunities to upgrade the system. Current IPAWS systems do not work on older cellular devices and may fail to reach the targeted public. Geofencing is an inaccuracy, as you've heard the previous speaker state. IPAWS should continue to better integrate and leverage IP-based systems, including integration into next-gen 911. I want to thank you, Chairman Demings and Ranking Member Kamick, for focusing on this critically important issue. Every single one of our citizens deserves to have their first responders equipped with the best and most reliable emergency communication systems, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Captain Meyer, for your testimony. There was a little bit of a connectivity issue there. I know that our team is going to troubleshoot with your team, so thank you so much for being with us today. The chair now recognizes Chief Lombard to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Demings and Ranking Member Kamick. I'm Chris Lombard, the Deputy Fire Chief with Seattle Fire Department and Acting Chair of the Communications Committee for the International
I'm sorry,
Association.
ma'am, were you able to hear the last?
Yep. I appreciate today's opportunity to discuss the progress that has been made in emergency communication since 9/11. As a responder who assisted with efforts at Ground Zero in New York, I'm keenly aware of the communications issues that faced responders on that day in 2001 and the progress made since. SAFECOM and FirstNet are two triumphs that emerged from the 9/11 Commission report for improving interoperability. Federal grants have also greatly improved responder communications through funding, training, information sharing, and equipment. As others have mentioned, the First Responder Network Authority is a nationwide cellular network that enables first responders to communicate within and across jurisdictions, provides redundancy to ensure network resilience, and reduces the impact of network congestion. Through FirstNet, first responders have priority and preemption on dedicated public safety spectrum. On behalf of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, I ask that Congress continue to support FirstNet. SAFECOM is also mentioned by others. A DHS advisory group works with stakeholders to develop better technologies and processes for the coordination of communication systems. SAFECOM trains first responders in emergency communications, coordinates grant guidance, and encourages interoperability. As the first vice chair of SAFECOM, I have seen its great work firsthand. On behalf of the IFC, I ask Congress to continue to support the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and its support of SAFECOM. Post 9/11, the State Homeland Security Program and Urban Area Security Initiative grants have been crucial to improving emergency communications. These grants incentivize first responders across jurisdictions to collaborate before, during, and after an incident. This coordination reduces confusion and directly saves lives. Our members have used this grant funding to improve regional radio interoperability and develop resilient communications. The IFC urges Congress to continue to support strong funding for SHSP and UASI grants. FEMA's assistance to firefighter grants and SAFER grants are also used for equipment, training, and staffing. AFG grants are key to public safety communications, especially since 50% of fire departments still lack enough portable radios to equip a full shift. The SAFER grants are used to address staffing shortages faced by all manner of fire departments. The IFC asks Congress to fully fund the AFG and SAFER grants, which are critical to the fire service. Though great progress has been made in emergency communications, there's still room for improvement. Many IFC members are often mentioning how 911 calls from jurisdictions are being improperly routed, resulting in significant delays. We should be able to do better in an emergency, and this highlights the need for 911 infrastructure to catch up with other commercially available technology. The IFC is a member of the Public Safety Next Generation 911 Coalition. The coalition requests that Congress enact legislation funding a $15 billion next-gen 911 package via the reconciliation package. The availability of spectrum for public safety operations is also critically important. The 4.9 gigahertz band was set aside for public safety's use after 9/11. Public safety use of 4.9 gigahertz spectrum includes hosting mission-critical broadband networks. Public safety has increasingly relied on this spectrum as new technologies become more widely used. Last October, the FCC issued an order to set up a system of state licenses to make 4.9 gigahertz spectrum available to commercial entities. Then on September 30th of this year, the FCC rescinded that order and adopted a notice that seeks comment on public safety and non-public safety use of the band. The IFC supports the FCC's decision to rescind the framework of state licenses. Public safety also uses 6 gigahertz spectrum to support backhaul for communication systems and radio communications in rural areas across the United States. The IFC urges Congress to continue to monitor these FCC proceedings to protect critical public safety communications in the 6 gigahertz band. In conclusion, public safety and emergency response are perhaps the pinnacle of team sports, with no higher expectations and no higher importance for getting it right. Immediately after 9/11, we recognized our challenges were people-based. We recognized that likewise, the successes I and others experienced on 9/11 were also because of the people and relationships we had formed. We wouldn't be here today without the spirit of working together and the foundations by the likes of retired police chief Harlan McEwen from Ithaca, New York, and retired fire chief and past president of the IFC, Jeff Johnson, instrumental in launching efforts like SafeCom, FirstNet, and others. It continues today with relationships that public safety forms, like the one between Captain Meyer and myself across the country. Facilitating and forming maintenance of these relationships may be the biggest single success that the federal government has done, and for that, we thank you. I thank the subcommittee for all it's done to improve public safety communications in the 20 years since 9/11. I also got to thank my family and the support team back at the IFC, Ryan Woodward and Ken LaSala. The IFC looks forward to continuing the work of the subcommittee and to address the continued communications needs of public safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chief Lombard, for your testimony. The chair now recognizes the sheriff from Putnam County, Sheriff Deloach, to summarize his statement for 5 minutes. Thank you, Sheriff, for being with us today.
Thank you, members of the subcommittee, Chairwoman Demings, and Ranking Member Kamick. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before this committee today. As a sheriff in a rural Florida county, my office faces unique challenges to communicate with our emergency service providers in the field. It's my pleasure to be with you here today and to share some of the obstacles we face while we work together to ensure our nation is best equipped to respond to emergent threats and life safety issues alike. I want to begin by talking about emergency communications post 9/11 to offer a rural perspective to members of the subcommittee. Although our nation has seen significant changes to the way that first responders communicate, there are still significant gaps and lapses in coverage areas. And just for a little background, Putnam County is part of rural Northeast Florida, situated approximately 60 miles south of Jacksonville and north of Daytona Beach. Our community and county is approximately 827 square miles with a population near 75,000 residents. Putnam County is comprised primarily of farmland and large stands of pine forest harvest for timber. The county is fiscally constrained and is designated as a county of critical economic concern by the Florida legislature. This presents significant challenges to our first responders, not the least of which is our emergency communication systems. While emergency services in rural areas look significantly different than it does for our urban counterparts, many things we do look the same. We all apply the same statutes and are held to the same standards by certifying bodies and have similar missions. What does contrast starkly, however, is how we communicate. The majority of our federal, state, and local partners use digital P25-based land mobile radio systems. Putnam County is an outlier in that we currently use an antiquated radio system, which is based on technology developed during the Second World War. Our current communications platform was an analog VHF radio system, primarily assembled of parts from decommissioned systems that were donated from other areas and were otherwise destined for a landfill. This effectively isolates us with no ability to communicate with our counterparts that we frequently work with or rely on for assistance. Imagine a law enforcement officer and a paramedic crew responding to a domestic violence call in a rural area, 25 to 30 minutes away from your current location. When you arrive, you speak to the victim who is conscious but not ambulatory and has a large laceration above the eye. Based on her description of her injuries, you suspect she may have internal injuries as well. The suspect ran into a densely forested area behind the residence. You try to reach the emergency communication center from your portable radio to request an expedited response from EMS and your backup, but get no response. You then attempt to use your cell phone to call, but have no luck. Frustrated, you have no choice but to leave the victim in a vulnerable position while you return to your patrol car to use your more powerful mobile radio. The dispatchers can hear you, but your transmission is filled with static and unintelligible at times. Fortunately, the dispatcher has the foresight to send another deputy to assist, but unfortunately, another 20 minutes will elapse before rescue arrives. The victim's condition deteriorates quickly because of the time delay. She suffers a stroke and loses her ability to speak and testify against her attacker. In 2013, the FCC issued a mandate that required analog VHF systems to narrowband or otherwise decrease their wavelength from 25 kilohertz to 12.5 kilohertz to free up additional frequencies. The net effect of that on us here was a greatly reduced ability to transmit or receive radio traffic, especially in buildings or in isolated areas. Post 9/11 funding was robust immediately following the attacks, but seems to have waned significantly. For rural communities, this funding was significant in assisting emergency communications and receiving vital technology in a timely manner. Larger communities have funded their communications upgrades through their ability to leverage money from an extensive and diverse socioeconomic population. Rural communities, unfortunately, lack that advantage. The majority of residents in communities like Putnam are older, rely on fixed incomes, and do not have the diversity of economic growth as seen in areas such as St. Johns or Orange counties. At the same time, communities such as Putnam are not so economically stagnant that we receive an overabundance of grant funding. Quite simply, we and other communities similar to ours are in a financial stranglehold where we have to choose to have the emergency responders to meet the needs of the community, but have the potential to lose signal with communications or pay to update the technology in communications, but not have the people to respond to the emergency call. Currently in Putnam County, we're still operating on the Florida Interoperability Network rather than the more up-to-date digital mutual aid model our area counterparts use. FIN is a technology developed that allows public safety counterparts to patch channels together, effectively creating a bridge that allows radio traffic and data to flow both directions. In the immediate post 9/11 years, there was a significant emphasis on interoperability, which led to the development of it. Focus on maintaining the system and others like it has all but grinded to a halt based on the use of digital mutual aid channels, which has contributed to a lack of maintenance and failure of user agencies to remain proficient in the operation of it. Furthermore, it has limitations, the most obvious of which being the user's inability to roam outside of their agency coverage area. From our perspective, the most logical and cost-effective strategy for rural areas is regional communication systems with independent dispatch centers. Multiple users or counties would share these systems within a geographic area and would enable the users to roam freely within their coverage area, which reduces costs based on shared infrastructure while still maintaining the autonomy of independent dispatch centers. Regional center models are not new. There are several well-established communication centers built nationwide and in Florida. These systems create additional efficiencies, the most notable of which creates a workaround, allowing certain transmitters to be optimized for additional coverage, which isn't currently allowed because the FCC mandates transmitters cannot transmit more than 5 miles outside of their intended coverage area. This also can reduce the need to build costly tower sites by leveraging optimized antenna placement versus a need to build additional sites when transmitters can be tuned accordingly. Although I'm not aware of any current agreements, we do also have the ability to use existing infrastructure through partnering with internet service providers, which allows for leasing of tower space for last mile efforts to further reduce costs.
Sheriff Deloach, excuse me, but your time has expired a couple of minutes ago, but during the line of questioning from the members, if there's something that is still in your opening statement that you want to share with us, please seize that opportunity to do that. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. And matter of fact, I want to thank all of our witnesses for your testimony. I would remind the subcommittee that we will each have 5 minutes to question the panel. I will now recognize myself for questions. I want to start with Chief Lombard. You said, having been on the ground during 9/11, you said something to the effect of, you're of course keenly aware of the conditions on the ground that day. And we know one of the major challenges was interoperability. Could you just kind of talk a little bit more of what it was like on the ground that day? And then since 9/11, paint a picture for us of the improvements that we've made, but we still need to make. Thank you.
Sure, Chair. Thank you very much for the question. So I responded with, so the FEMA contracts around the nation to form 28 urban search and rescue teams. The Seattle Fire Department is part of one of those teams. So we responded, we were actually in what was the second round, and it was definitely a life-altering experience. The sights, the sounds, the smells, like nothing I've ever seen since or had never seen before. Like you, I was coming off duty that morning and saw the news on the TV, and it was, again, life-altering. When we responded to New York, one of the challenges is that even as the federal USAR teams, we all had disparate communications. Further, our communications didn't integrate to the public safety responders, the police, fire, EMTs, dispatch on scene as well. So we had to make extensive use of runners. We had to kind of come by fly-by-wire patching and communications, networks to try to do the best that we could at the time. Thankfully, like I had mentioned in my testimony, there were some relationships that were already established. So at least we had some kind of idea on who we should reach out to and who we should talk to. Talking with colleagues and counterparts at the Washington, D.C. aspect of 9/11, it was kind of the same thing, that they tried to patch everything, and then all of a sudden everybody was talking to everybody and nobody could talk. So probably the biggest success was, again, the bringing all of the efforts together with SAFECOM under what was eventually DHS. SAFECOM had a couple of key models to identify ways to improve governance, equipment, standard operating procedures, training and exercises. And through those and coordinating the grant funds accordingly in each of those areas, what we've been able to do since is, through attrition, public safety all across the United States has been able to do a much better job at coordinating as far as our purchases. Hey, what are you guys getting? What are we getting? How should we talk? Language, the example that we always use between police and fire, and in your family, I'm sure you know how these little debates go between police and fire. Lots of good kidding and ribbing. If the military says cover me, if a firefighter says cover me, and if a police officer says cover me, you can get some very different responses as to what that will mean, whether it's water, whether it's equipment, or whether there's guns being pulled out. So we've worked on all of those different aspects. Again, FirstNet, SAFECOM, the technology's coming, but we didn't get into that position, on September 10th. It took a long time to get into the pickle, and it's going to continue to take time to get out of it.
Chief, thank you so much for that. Captain Meyer, you talked a little bit in your opening statement about IPAWS and the usefulness of that platform. What would you say are some additional things that can be done to improve the performance of the platform?
One of the most important things that FirstNet has done for us, and can you hear me okay, ma'am? I should check first. All right. Thank you. My apologies for the earlier technical difficulties. But with FirstNet, we have to talk about the resiliency of the network and to make sure that the build out, as it's at, I think it's 95% complete at this point, moving Band 14 across the United States, putting that national public safety broadband power in the hands of first responders, that we want to make sure some of that legacy equipment, that the towers are actually built to standards that we would use for our public safety radio systems, that the power systems that back them up, that the diversity of the paths that actually connect those network of networks together is built to that same standard. And so we see that with FirstNet, they do have a transparency platform with AT&T where I can see as a first responder this health of the network. I can see how things are going. I can see if there's outages or impairments. And here's the thing for us. As first responders, we actually have to anticipate those disruptions and impairments to our operations. We do that all the time, and that includes outages, not just related to FirstNet. We plan for those responses, and then during those events, as well as for recovery. So we know that FirstNet is working with them on this. I have some experience this. I was part of the FirstNet Public Safety Advisory Committee for many years, served as its vice chair. Proud to say that I'm very proud of the effort we've seen through the FirstNet Authority and the hard-working people there. And also think about the deployables that they've put out. They have more than 100 deployables ready to go that can be pre-staged like they did in DC, like they've done in Michigan, prepare for events like they've done in Florida and New Orleans. And those are things that we have to be ready for. I'm talking to you from New Orleans right now, and I can see the devastation when I look out the window of what these storms can do and how they can tear up infrastructure. And that's what being prepared is doing for us. By partnering with FirstNet and moving this forward, we are building in more resiliency. We're identifying the weak parts. We're ensuring the diversity of the pathways. I'm very proud of the work that's going on with it, and it's a very, very useful tool for public safety.
Captain Meyer, thank you so much for your response. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlewoman from Florida, for your questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Demings. This question is going to be for Sheriff Deloach, Chief Lombard, and Captain Meyer. If you guys could quickly, because I only have 5 minutes, just weigh in yes or no and then elaborate just a little bit. As you guys know, CISA has cybersecurity advisors deployed across the 10 FEMA regions, and you all have worked with FEMA in one capacity or another to assist state and local governments and the private sector to help mitigate cyber threats. So my question to you three is, have you had any engagement with the CISA representatives regarding cybersecurity services? And if so, has that engagement been beneficial and how can it be improved? I'll start with you, Sheriff Deloach.
While my office has not had any personal engagement with CISA, we do have, even for a very rural county, a very robust response to cyber threats that we address through our internal IT staff, and also one of the vendors of record that we use here.
Thank you. Captain Meyer?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes is the short answer. To expand upon that, I was part of the SAFECOM committee under CISA for many years. I was chair of funding and sustainment, and we took into account building these networks from the bottom up to include cyber security so that they're built upon the network of networks security. And in fact, one of the things that we've used is that CISA model of really about intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems and building those in. The contact with CISA is extensive. I mean, honestly, it would take more than 5 minutes to list it all, but I can tell you they do have the ability to do a technical assistance program that they can actually go out and help identify gaps in what your technology services, especially communications, is doing, as well as some of the ComT stuff. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Captain Meyer. Chief Lombard?
Yeah, ranking member, yes. We actually had the privilege to meet newly appointed director Jen Easterly, and we've had several meetings with Deputy Director Nitin Najaran, and some great outcomes from that. You know, being from the home of Amazon and Microsoft, one of the things that we've started to do through SAFECOM and working with CISA is start to really foster some of those public-private partnerships on, you know, where are some of the expertise and how can we bring some of the talents and the support from the federal government together to start addressing public safety needs in this.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief. Sheriff Deloach, as you know, and we have talked about several times before, about 60 million Americans, or 1 in 5 Americans, live in rural America. In fact, 97% of America is rural. So knowing that, and you representing a rural community, can you talk about what it would cost your department to upgrade your radio system?
Yes, absolutely. So we have, we're actually in the process of attempting to upgrade our radio system and identify a funding source right now. The long and short of it is that it would cost us about $7 to $8 million to upgrade our radio system and the existing infrastructure. So we're in a position where we can either buy the car or put gas in it, so to speak.
and I know we're going to dig into a lot of the nitty gritty systems themselves and some of the grant funding programs, but something that constantly, I believe, gets overlooked is the personal human side of what can happen when these radio systems are going down or they don't work. Have you ever, or anyone in your department, had a situation where an officer was put in danger or there was a loss of life due to a lack of communications?
Fortunately, we have not had a loss of life. However, there are more than we can cover in the short period of time that we have of situations where both fire and EMS crews and deputies were placed in grave harm or peril because of their lack of ability to communicate back with our regional communication center.
Excellent. I've got about 20 seconds left, so I'm going to open it up to all of the witnesses. I think it'll probably be hit on later today, but I just yes or no in my 10 seconds. You have experienced within your department potentially tragic situations or a tragic situation due to a lack of communication. Chief Lombard?
Yes, there's many examples in the fire service where either radio failures or radio system failures have led to fatalities. Lots of reports affirming that.
Captain Meyer?
Yes, we had an incident at a shooting scene where departments could not talk to each other, created a much more dangerous event. It's a terrible situation that could have been averted with better communications.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you so much to the ranking member. The chair will now recognize other members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. In accordance with the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in their February 3rd colloquy, I will recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority. Members are also reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questioning. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee. Sheila, I know you were on earlier. Is Ms. Jackson Lee still with us? Okay. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's thank you for having this hearing, very timely hearing, and I'm very pleased to hear the discussion earlier in the beginning of the hearing with mention of HR 615, the DHS Interoperable Communications Act, which was I authored that legislation, so I'm very proud of that, and also shepherded in the FirstNet operation here at DHS. So it's really good to hear all of that being functioning and active here at Homeland. Dr. Rodriguez, it's good to see you again. We miss you in Jersey, but it was wonderful that you landed in Washington.
Thank you, sir.
Let's see. So access to emergency alerts and calls are necessary for every American, no matter what the economic background or ability. What systems or initiatives does your agency have in place to ensure that all residents receive emergency alerts and information?
Congressman Payne, thank you for the question. You're right, and here in the district, we do have a diverse socioeconomic resident population. And we did see that certainly in our response to the pandemic, but also with some of the disasters and emergencies that we've experienced. So in addition to some of the tools that I mentioned in my opening statements, we do employ a multifaceted and multimodal approach to disseminating information. I mentioned our Alert DC campaign, which will go and ping to our residents' cell phones, either via text or via email. We also, through the mayor's office and many of our community-based organizations, do a lot of door-to-door canvassing as well, directly reaching our residents, particularly in our more disadvantaged wards, Ward 7 and 8 in particular. And we also try to reach our residents by getting them to also sign up for some of our telephone notifications. So for residents that don't have cell phones, for example, we can, through our public messaging campaigns, again, working with the mayor's office, we're able to reach them in that way so that we can make calls to them during an emergency.
Thank you. And in 2018, a false ballistic missile alert was accidentally issued in Hawaii via the emergency alert system and the wireless emergency alert system. This false alarm caused widespread concern. How can we ensure that such accidents never happen again? And are there current challenges or concerns that you have with the emergency alert system and the wireless emergency alert system?
Thank you. And certainly remember that false alarm and alert that was sent out. It did reverberate, I think, across the country, and for a lot
I
of
need to get on to the next Republican.
sorry,
Hear me?
for a lot of the witnesses on the line, it was significant. So what we did here, and my agency actually disseminates the WIA alerts on behalf of the district. And so we actually looked at our processes for ensuring that that type of message wouldn't go out. So we do have a layered approach to not only drafting a WIA message, but also looking at our geofencing and where we're actually doing it. I mentioned the challenges of geofencing. It's not an accurate technology, so we do get bleed over sometimes into Maryland and Virginia, our surrounding counties, which can also be a challenge. But we do have a layered process for ensuring that once the send is hit on the WIA, that has been looked at by several individuals before we actually put out and vetted before it's put out to the public.
Well, thank you for those responses. And Madam Chair, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you so much. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
I thank my friend and colleague, the chairwoman, and the ranking member for holding this hearing today, and I thank our law enforcement and first responders for being here today. Madam Chair, I'm concerned about continued endeavors to defund the police, and as it relates to today's topic, communications and the effectiveness thereof. Here's an example. In Austin, Texas, the police department was defunded to the tune of $150 million. That's about a third of their budget. It's facing quite a crisis. In fact, the department is now reporting that they're not going to respond to many calls. They've advised the citizens of Austin to dial 311 for many complaints, including burglaries, suspicious vehicles and people, public disturbances. And let me clarify that from Austin's website, when you dial 311, your call is answered by a friendly and knowledgeable City of Austin ambassador. Our ambassadors are always ready to answer any questions or assist you with any issue you may have regarding the City of Austin's departments or services, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you dial 311, you can get an ambassador. Now, let me just say, when an American citizen is in a bind, they feel like they need to call 911. They need to be sure, we, the people, need to be certain that there's a police officer on the other end of that phone. And the Austin example is quite startling because it's happening across the country in different ways. And after reviewing each of our first responders and law enforcement witness testimonies today, there was a common theme. Every witness here talks about the need for additional resources. So the answer to improving emergency response efforts, including communications and interoperability across departmental jurisdictional authority, has never been to withdraw resources from our first responders. And as a former cop, I can assure the country that defunding the police is the greatest threat to our nation's ability to respond to emergencies. Sheriff Deloach, I'm going to ask you a question. And I'm going to call you Sheriff Gator Deloach because that's the coolest name that has come through this committee in quite some time. According to a post-Katrina FCC report, More than 1,000 cell sites were knocked out, preventing millions of calls from going through. The report goes on to say a large number of transmission outages also had a huge impact on the ability of public safety systems to communicate. Your county is susceptible to hurricanes. I have firsthand experience in the challenges that first responders face, that cops face when dealing with the aftermath of a hurricane and communications. Could you please explain to the committee how hurricanes challenge your communications interoperability gap and how a county sheriff like yourself would respond to those challenges, and as that might relate to moves to defund the police? And I'll yield the balance of my time to you, Sheriff Gator, to answer that question for the country.
Thank you, Representative Higgins. That's an excellent question. Yes, hurricanes are one of the biggest threats that face our communications infrastructure systems. In fact, that ties directly back into my testimony, so I'll dovetail off of some of that whenever we talk about a regional communication system and regional approaches. We are actually in the process of negotiating with St. Johns County, which is our sister county to the east, to potentially develop a regional communication center, which would allow coastal counties like St. John's to tie into our system, or rather us to tie into their system, to build additional redundancies and fail safes in the event that we have some type of a catastrophic failure, which would allow both entities to continue to operate independent of one another while still depending on the same core or the same common system, if that makes sense.
Yes, Sheriff, that makes sense to me. And Madam Chair, I cannot see the clock. I don't know if I have time remaining.
You have 25 seconds left.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the clarification. Sheriff, could you continue to and comment, just talk to America about the challenge that, because there's some legitimate argument, you understand it, and it's okay for Americans to have this debate, but would you just honestly respond from your perspective to the attempt to defund police across the country?
The gentleman's time has expired, but the witness may answer the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So fortunately, living in rural Northeast Florida, we don't even have those discussions here. Law enforcement is almost unilaterally respected by our citizens, and we're very grateful for that. My heart certainly goes out to my brothers and sisters in blue who are experiencing some of those devastating blows to their departments, and certainly even more so to the residents who are suffering at the hands of the funds or the attempt to defund police right now. It's un-American in my opinion, and shouldn't be tolerated.
The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
I'm trying to unmute. Am I being
We can hear you now.
heard? Thank you so very much. Let me quickly move.
Ms. Jackson Lee, you're on 2 different screens. Perhaps if we could eliminate one of them, there's some feedback. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to do that.
We've eliminated it, I think. We were desperately trying to get on everywhere, but here we are.
That's better. That's better. Go right ahead.
I still see some jeopardy here, so I better talk very fast. First of all, Madam Chair, thank you so very much.
Ms. Jackson Lee, we continue to have
committee hearing and the rank. I want to both of you, Floridian ranking member.
Ms. Jackson Lee, we're still having some communications issues. We are going to come back to you. We're going to come back to you. The chair will now recognize the gentlewoman from New Jersey, Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And thank you to the witnesses. I haven't had a chance to be here for the entire thing because I was double booked, as life is. But I am very much concerned about this issue. You you all represent very different communities, but one thing you all have in common is the vulnerability of being hacked by cyber criminals. Standard communication systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks where encrypted information can be intercepted and copied. And a hacker can attack electronic devices used for information transmission. So let me ask you, Captain Meyer, what are some of your cybersecurity concerns, and do you feel as though DHS has been as supportive as it needs to be with this mission?
Thank you, Congresswoman. That's the best question I've had really related to cyber. What keeps me up at night? And cyber intrusion is a serious threat, and it is a scary consideration that we put this digital data, personal information, all of this information that is so essential to criminal justice out on the internet and all these other places, and people are hacking in. It is a danger. And so one of the things that we've done is we've said, look, these need to be closed systems with controls at entry, controls that have to do with credentialing and management, controls that have to do with understanding the physical layers of the network versus the logical layers of the network. And those are the things that are built into the best systems out there. And we look at some of the work that the CGIS through DHS and through NIST and all of those agencies have really done. And we're talking about risk identification, whether it's assets, data, and those capabilities. Putting that all together for us, we protect it, we detect it, we then respond, and then we recover. That's how we do things, and those are the best systems. But remember, the most important thing is our employees and the people that work for us. We have to do that training, and we have to make sure that they have the information available to say, this is a scam, don't respond to that email, we've all seen them, or the telephone calls, and DHS has been on the front of that. And especially having the folks from CISA, they're actually able to work with us in Southeast Michigan. It's been very important for us, and it's effective.
Thank you, Captain. We want to make sure that you have whatever resources and whatever support that you need from DHS. And
thank you, ma'am. We appreciate your help in the work of those professionals.
Well, please know that we are strong supporters of the resources that you need. We're strong supporters of law enforcement across this country, and we don't engage in hyperbole or politicization of the protection of our citizens with law enforcement. I have a question for Dr. Rodriguez, and Dr. Rodriguez, always good to see you. The attack that took place on January 6th was just sort of unexpected, and I think it was I don't know, maybe it certainly was unacceptable, and it was unexpected with people like me. I personally said, let's go to the Capitol because we'll be safe there. And lo and behold, that was like the worst place we could have been on that day. So, Dr. Rodriguez, I want to ask you, could you please describe the current communications operation in our nation's capital and detail what systems worked on January 6th, and what systems caused challenges, and where we are in fixing those? Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and I appreciate the question. It's good to see you as well. As I mentioned in my opening statements, the FirstNet system did work reliably and consistently on January 6th, which I think did assist our first responders, the Metropolitan Police Department, Capitol Police, in doing what they needed to do to clear the Capitol of the insurrectionists. I would also add that there are some, as I mentioned, also our DC radio system did work well as well on the 6th. We do continue to look for ways that we can better partner with our federal counterparts, the Park Police, the Capitol Police, in order to make sure that there is that interoperable communications with our federal partners, because oftentimes, with our First Amendment events and the special events we host here in the nation's capital, we do need to make sure that we are able to communicate very quickly with our federal counterparts, because we're called on to support them in many instances.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Madam Chair, how much time do I have?
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Can I just close with a question? Can I just close maybe with a comment? because Dr. Rodriguez raised for me something that was really quite significant, and that Washington was ready and able to respond in a timely manner at the point that it knew it needed to respond. So the questions that still need to be answered is, why weren't we proactively prepared? Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you so much. The gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member Kamek, and to all of our witnesses, our first responders, our firefighters, our sheriffs, all of you who are here with us today. It's greatly appreciated the work that you do. Sheriff Deloach, you mentioned response to hurricanes and how that affects you. Others of you have mentioned other disasters, how they affect your different regions. In Iowa, we don't get hurricanes unless they're called derechos, which are inland hurricanes. And so some of the comments that I've heard today have talked about resiliency, and I've heard a lot about the FirstNet system and using, cellular communication. But in a derecho, I can tell you that here in Iowa and central Iowa affected some of our larger cities, and cellular towers, cellular communication was unavailable. As a state senator, I've put through legislation for broadband. Our governor, Governor Reynolds, has just put through $100 million to broadband. So my question really, and Dr. Rodriguez, maybe you can answer this, or Sheriff Deloach can answer. Should we have, in order to have resiliency, should we not have also redundancy of communication systems, because the same natural or unnatural disaster is not going to affect both areas? And this also leads into the cybersecurity arena as well. What's the possibility of satellites being taken out in outer space? What does that do to our communication system? We have seen US companies purchased by the Chinese Communist Party. And if a Chinese Communist Party purchases a US system, or for example, Huawei and 5G as it's being developed, and the challenges with Huawei and security, I think all of these things are important as we develop a communication system and strategy, and hopefully we'll see that in this upcoming report. So if Dr. Rodriguez and Sheriff Deloach could answer that question briefly, it would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Sheriff, I'll defer to you, and then I'll come in after you, if that's all right.
Certainly, thank you. That's an excellent question. I think one of the key components to focus on here is with the FirstNet build out, which coincidentally is almost complete in Putnam County, and we're nearing the final stages of completion here. One of the things that that FirstNet brings that makes it so attractive is an additional layer of redundancy above and beyond our land mobile radio system, which allows it to serve as an adjunct to that to our traditional radio system, and even allows us to transmit data that we would normally transmit over our digital land mobile radio systems over a cellular or LTE network. With that in mind, and with the particular types of storms that you're talking about, it's difficult to to build out some type of infrastructure that could survive some type of a catastrophic, really powerful major hurricane, or some type of a 500-year storm. But that was something that FirstNet actually took into consideration whenever they were in the design and engineering phase. So certainly credit goes to them and everyone who had a hand in that.
Thank you. And before you answer, Dr. Rodriguez, as we've recently seen with the outage of Facebook, we know that these types of redundancies are necessary because one communication avenue may be susceptible. So Dr. Rodriguez, if you'd expand upon that, and thank you again for your testimony.
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Sheriff. In the district, our interoperability coordinator really develops our plan, and it's really based on the PACE framework, right? The primary, which is our radio system, the alternate, which is our cell system, our contingencies would be satellite, and then our emergency in a worst case scenario would be amateur radio runners. And so we follow that framework for our communications ecosystem here, and certainly with the National Capital region, and we plan and we train to that. The other thing I would say is, at the national level, you're talking about state actors too, Congresswoman. I think as the national government, the federal government really examines national resiliency, particularly as part of its continuity of the economy framework, as was mandated in last year's NDA in Section 9603. I think it's really important for state and local authorities to be part of that planning process and that training process so that they know sort of at the last mile and how it does impact the residents, states, and local jurisdictions. Thank you.
That's an excellent point. So thank you so much for your testimony. And Madam Chair, thank you for indulging them to answer the questions despite my time having expired. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I could have a sense of humor about operating on 2 and 3 and 4 devices trying to get into this hearing, but I was hearing it, and it is an important hearing. And so I want to again thank you very much for your leadership, to Floridians and the ranking member. And I appreciate the fact that we have a combination, very important combination of police departments and fire departments in our chair and ranking member. I support both in terms of the vital work that they do, coming from Texas and coming from Houston, and being in the eye of disasters. We have had to rely upon the teams working together. Let me give a brief anecdote as I raise my questions to the witnesses that are there. I was in the United States Capitol on 9/11. I was told by then Capitol Police, the first voices we heard to get out and run as we saw them doing their job. And it was well known that the first level of information was not any information because we did not have the connectedness that we needed. And rumors were that they were headed toward the White House, the Capitol, the State Department, and as well that they were headed to Houston, Texas, because it was the energy capital of the world. So I firsthand understand clearly, in contrary to my dear friend from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, that we cities and communities, we support police with funding. We understand, and you should understand, that there are issues that would involve the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, but we are supportive of the basic infrastructure of law enforcement in this nation, and that is all Americans who cede themselves to the authority of law enforcement and first responders, fire departments, as they do their job. So let me ask this general question that may have been asked, but I can ask in a different way. It is all about infrastructure. It is all about the connectedness that you need to communicate. And in our visit to 9/11, we were so much reminded of what happened with the firefighters, heroic running up those stairs, and how different systems cannot communicate. So I understand we're still on the 1960s and 1970s infrastructure. Give us just your points of what we need to do immediately. There's a funding question, there's a technology question, and I know that you have been answering, but give it to me in a pointed way so that we can end this in 2021 that you've been in dealing with for this long period of time. And I would be delighted to have the witnesses answer these questions if they would. And do I need to call on the Deputy Chief of the Fire Department in Seattle and then others who could answer? Thank you.
Thank you,
Chief
Congresswoman.
Lombard. Chief Lombard.
Thank
There
you,
you are.
Congresswoman. So one of the things you mentioned the technology, but I can't emphasize enough the people aspect, that making sure that we have the people that we know how to talk to. When I went down to Hurricane Harvey, one of the
Yes.
first phone calls I was able to make was to Todd Early, your SWIC, your statewide interoperability coordinator, and Ken Wright, who works with the Houston Fire Department. By contacting them, I was able to find out who I needed to talk to find out and facilitate the communications infrastructure. What's working, what's not, what can we bring, how can we help you? DHS's support of SAFECOM and the FirstNet Public Safety Advisory Committee are two great examples where you as Congress are bringing us together so that we can make those connections, make those relationships, so that when disaster does come, we know who to contact on the ground.
So Chief Meyer, Sheriff Meyer, what is your assessment of the greater work that we can do for law enforcement and the connectivity that you need? And speak about connectivity between different first responders, such as connectivity with fire departments, in addition to police departments or law enforcement. Chief Meyer?
Thank you,
Sheriff Meyer?
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you now.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Congresswoman, thank you for giving me a chance to talk about this. One of the most important things that Deputy Chief Lombard talked about was that communication planning process, and that is a fact. DHS has been a leader on this and continued funding and support of SAFECOM, where I served as funding and sustainment, where we developed ideas of how to have radio systems that not just interconnected, but were truly interoperable, because we understood, as you stated, we have to talk to the police, the fire, the EMS, and all of the public safety people that support us. Those relationships and in the planning process are the single most important thing to move forward. Technology can be leveraged, most certainly. We add path diversity, we include resilience in our systems. As the sheriff talked about in Florida, we can have alternate locations to have our emergency communication centers so that if they are affected, they don't take out the entire communication system, just part of it that is affected. And we work around those. That's what we plan to do. Your continued support and funding of DHS SAFECOM and the efforts that we're doing will help keep us on the right path forward.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much for this
and your answers.
hearing.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank the ranking member as well. I'm very appreciative that we have such outstanding witnesses today to share intelligence with us. This is one of those times when I think we can all agree that the success of what we're attempting to accomplish is going to be of great benefit, not only in terms of interoperability as it relates to fire and police, which is very important, because I was here when Katrina hit. I remember how we had the lack of interoperability at that time, and this is very important. But also I'm concerned about interoperability as it relates to the general public, because there are times when the lines, the means of communication by way of cell phone, they're oversaturated. And that oversaturation leaves the public without an opportunity to ascertain what the salient issues are. So I'm interested in getting some sense of how we are interconnecting with interoperability as it relates to the general public. And I'll start with Mr. Christopher Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez, your thoughts on the public and how we phase the public into all of this, because many times I'm being called upon and I can't get through to the people that need to know.
Yes, thank you very much, Congressman Green, for the question. And I think it's important to look at the public as part of a larger emergency communications ecosystem of which they are a part of it. And so from our perspective in the district, I mentioned earlier in my comments about the ways that we try to reach the public as a city and actually as a region. We do have a regional watch and warn notification team that actually sits in the district that will alert the National Capital Region residents, of which there are nearly 6 million, if you include the district and surrounding counties. So we can reach them, but also they need to know how to reach us. If there are issues that they need to bring in emergencies or disasters, whether it's reporting suspicious activities or letting us know that a road is closed or a traffic accident has happened. And so we do a lot of communication with the public to make sure they know how to sign up for our alerts, how to get direct feeds from authorities, but also how to communicate with us as well.
Let me share an additional concern. When we've had hurricanes here in Houston, I get a lot of calls to my office about electric wires, power lines that are down, and they're out in the street and they're bouncing around. And the public needs to get help, needs to get somebody out to take care of these wires, and they call my office. So there's an additional reason for this. This was the thing that came to mind when it was called to my attention. So that's important. But let me move on and ask the Honorable H.D. Is it Deloach? Deloach? Can you comment on this, Sheriff?
Yes, sir. Just to dovetail on what Dr. Rodriguez was talking about, that presents a significant challenge in a rural community. Not unlike your area, we're frequently faced with hurricanes and significant storms, and I think the early warning is key because there is that knowledge we have from past storms that typically there's some infrastructure failures there. So I think that really what's key to this conversation is that early warning and notification prior to the impact of the actual storm, so that residents can put protective measures in place and evacuate the areas if they're in low-lying areas. Not unlike any other place, we use a multifaceted approach when it comes to communication. We rely heavily on social media, an early warning system, and also a messaging system and reverse 911 system to push out those messages. But I think there still needs to be some significant work that's done as far as building redundancy and resiliency into those systems, so that they function even when conditions are less than optimal.
Well, I have about 25 seconds left according to my timer. I don't have the actual timer, so let me just share this thought with you. My uncle was a deputy sheriff, and I attribute my success in life to him because of some sage advice that he gave me. So I want to let you know how much I appreciate the persons who are in law enforcement, fire departments, the constables, the various members of the constabulary who are out there putting your lives on the line to make sure we're safe. And sometimes you go above and beyond the call of duty, even when it's not required for you to go above and beyond the call of duty. So thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair, again, for your sage advice that you have given us as we've gone through this process as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. The gentleman yields back. We do have time for a second round of questioning if the members so desire. I want to thank our witnesses for the outstanding job and information that you have given us today. I'll begin with myself. One of the things that I said in my opening statement was members of Congress have an important role to play. We have an important role to play. And today we are here to assess our progress over the last 20 years to ensure that our first responders and emergency management personnel have the resources to effectively respond to tragedies and to protect human life, to protect the American people. I thank you for staying focused today on that goal and on that purpose. We never want a vicious and cowardly attack like we saw on 9/11 to ever happen to us again. That's not a political goal. That should be everybody's goal. And so I want to thank you for what you've added to this conversation and the information that you've given us as members of Congress who are laser focused on making sure that you have the resources that you need. A part of that, of course, are the DHS grants. And I'd just like to ask all of the witnesses, how has the DHS preparedness grants, such as URASI and State Homeland Security Program, help further develop your communication strategies? I'd like to ask all of the witnesses, and Dr. Rodriguez, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I appreciate the question, Congresswoman. The preparedness grants are an essential part of our ability to be interoperable. Since 2003, the National Capital Region has received about $1.2 billion in preparedness grants, of which close to $300 million has been spent to upgrade our radio systems and make them more interoperable. And most of the, but that doesn't tell the whole story, right? Because there are a lot of local budgets that are impacted by having to upgrade radio systems every year. And then we do a large replacement of our regional cache every 10 years. And so that cost is about 10 million per year to just do upgrades to the system. The other challenge that we have, and we appreciate the subcommittee's assistance on this, is of course FEMA putting in place mandatory minimums for what we have to spend the grant on. And I think as we enter a period of where we have to be very flexible, the mandatory minimums, which account for about 30% of the grants that all the UASI regions get, kind of put these limits on what it is we can spend on, when in my view, we need to remain flexible and nimble, particularly for state and local jurisdictions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez. Chief Lombard.
Thank you very much, Chair. The grants have been phenomenal, and in fact, they have been absolutely essential, certainly for our region. It's, we're not just buying equipment, although equipment is very important. We've been able to, get over the hump, so to speak, as far as speeding up processes to make sure that our radio systems intertwine to all of those radio systems around us at the state, the local, the level, the tribal level, and whatnot. But additionally, they've actually helped us as far as training and exercises. So the equipment's only as good as your ability to know what you're using and working. So we've, over the years, had multiple training and exercise scenarios where we actually got to use the equipment and practice talking to each other before the big disaster. And then in the usage, we've been able to use the grants to get together committees to work on policy, so that we know, on game day, here's what I need to do, here's where I need to go. So again, the policy, the equipment, the usage, putting the governance committees, it's all got to work together. And the grants have been instrumental in making that happen, certainly in our region and many like ours.
Thank you. And Sheriff Deloach, I grew up in a rural part of Jacksonville in Mandarin. I'm sure you're familiar with that area. But I so appreciate what you said, the scenario of, the challenges may be different. The amount of support that you get may be different, but you're responding to the same calls, enforcing the same laws. So the level of service that you're expected to give is really the same. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of grants in your area?
Certainly. Thank you again, Madam Chair. The unfortunate reality is that typically what we see, at least in Florida, with regard to UASI and DHS monies, is that they're typically funded or funneled towards the more urban areas down in Broward County in the southern part of the state, and even into Duval and Orange counties. And I understand the importance of protecting those infrastructures and ports and some of the assets that we have in those more populous areas. But sometimes it feels as if some of the more rural areas in Florida and across the nation often are overlooked or can't meet the demands of the reporting requirements and other demands that grants place on us.
Thank you, Sheriff. And last but not least, Captain Meyer.
One of the things we see with the UASI funding is it's essential to help us move forward, especially since 9/11. And the funding, while it has been reduced, it has stabilized the last few years. We would just ask that you continue funding that moving forward. And to align really with what you had said earlier, with 25.
Captain Meyer, we're having some audio. Are you?
Operable communications.
Okay.
Subcommittee. And with the interoperable communications subcommittee, we've seen our amount of that shrink too. But Chris Lombard is correct. We have addressed more training issues rather than equipment related. But here's the thing, as long as through that grant guidance, we're able to give the best direction possible to avoid those proprietary interfaces and those one-off connections for some of these communication packages, we're going to be in a much better position. Thank you for supporting us on that.
Thank you so much. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Kamick, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And you hit on one of the issues that I really wanted to bring to light and discuss today, which is the challenges that some of our rural communities have with these grants. So many of them are really just unattainable from a number of vantage points. One being they don't meet the requirements in Putnam County, for example, and Sheriff Deloach can speak to this. We have the main city, Palaco, which is exactly 400 people over the threshold for certain grants for low population areas. So because of that, they have the exact same struggles that very small rural communities have, but that 400 person over the limit has excluded them from a number of grants, putting them in a pile to compete with cities like Jacksonville or Orlando or Miami. So Sheriff Deloach, I'd love for you to just touch on this. I just went through about 28 pages of available grants through DHS. And it looks like Putnam County and several of the rural communities, and as was mentioned earlier, 97% of America is rural. 1 in 5 Americans live in rural America. And when you look at that list of available DHS grants, communities and rural communities only are eligible to apply to about 10 to 15% of those. Can you talk about how you guys are getting creative and what we could be doing to open up that grant a little bit more so that we're covering both the urban areas, but also the rural communities?
Certainly, and I'll say this as a qualifier prior to answering the questions. Certainly when it comes to grants and reporting requirements, I understand the need for accountability. But whenever I manage an organization like mine, where we have 256 full-time employees, a complete complement of 308 full and part-time employees, it's difficult when you contrast us with someone down in South Florida where they have a staff and several thousand people and perhaps an entire floor in a building dedicated to management of grants. Unfortunately, those are just resources that we don't have available to us. And like you just said a few minutes ago, because of the quagmire that we're placed in, because of that awkward stage in growth where we are now, it knocks us out of eligibility for many of them. So I would ask each of you to reconsider those eligibility requirements to open them up to some of rural America so that we have access to that money.
Thank you, Sheriff. And this question is for Chief Lombard. So in your testimony, you had highlighted that SafeCom had been critical to improving interoperability. You also highlighted how SafeCom is one of the first organizations to bring together representatives from public safety associations as well as emergency responders in the field. Can you talk a little bit more about how important it is to have buy-in from the emergency responders in the field and across all spectrums, rank and file, all the way up to management, when discussing things like SafeCom or the National Emergency Communications Plan? And as a caveat to that, can you also talk about, from your perspective, do you think that rural America is represented accurately and adequately in these discussions when you're building this out?
Absolutely. So one of the key points that you captured on, Congresswoman, was that, first response is only effective in so much as the secondary response is able to sustain the events. So one of the things that SAFECOM has done that has been so well received is to actually bring in those other parties. So for example, a dear friend of mine, Philip Mann, who's the Public Works Director at Gainesville, Florida, represents Public Works throughout the United States, recognizing that, when we're talking about interoperability issues, when we're talking about sustaining the response that police, fire, and EMS and 911 are doing, being able to bring in experts like Director Mann and talk about, okay, if you want to keep the water on the big fire, if you want to keep the roads open, how are we going to be able to, how communicate to us and for continuing that dialogue. SAFECOM really strives to maintain a really diverse group as far as, again, federal, state, local people are brought together, responders are brought together, not just big cities. There's a lot of smaller, more rural areas that are brought together too, because one of the things that we find at the end of the day is that even though some of us are bigger or smaller, so many of these issues are the same. It's just a matter of scaling. the Western United States, 50% or almost 50% of the land is all federal out here. So you don't have to go too far outside of the big cities on the West Coast before you get into some very rural area. And as you know, with the wildland fires every year, we're going there a lot. So it's, again, the funding and the support that the federal government has gotten or put forth on helping us facilitate those relationships. I think the bang for the buck that we've been getting is just amazing as far as bringing us together and letting us collectively work our problems out. Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, no, that does. And thank you, Chairwoman Demings, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today. This is an issue that is important in every single one of our congressional districts, and we want to make sure that we're working effectively and efficiently in delivering real solutions that meet the needs on the ground. So I look forward to continuing that work, and thank you, Congresswoman Demings and Chairwoman, for allowing a second round of questions.
I want to thank the ranking member. Of course, I too look forward to continuing the work with you and other members of this subcommittee to make sure that we are being responsive to the needs of all America, particularly looking at grant eligibility. So I look forward to that work. I want to know if there are any additional members who would like to ask questions. The chair now recognizes a gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for the hearing along with the ranking member. I'm going to ask Director Rodriguez, and I am certainly want to express my appreciation here international that you have charge of. So obviously, January 6th was a extreme day for all of us, and it drew on every for America to see Americans attacking our first responders in a way that it was unspeakable. But it's to the coordination question that I'm consumed with. I want to ask the question, maybe again, dealing with FirstNet, because you stated ultimately this collaboration and their dedicated bandwidth allowed FirstNet to perform reliably for our first responders at the UN January 6th. We're in the process of working with FirstNet to acquire 2 of our own and reliable units, which will contribute and self-sufficiency for the district emergency communications. I know that you might not pointedly be able to comment, but I do understand amongst our Capitol Police, for example, they were speaking about some inoperability, and it is important that the team in the District of Columbia can all communicate. That would be the Capitol Police, other federal authorities, and all of you. Can you to the requiring of more funding so that Congress can how we can approve the funding on how to secure this competency and also with FirstNet and what you might need. Director? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Jackson Lee.
Director Rodriguez?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Representative
Yes,
Jackson
absolutely.
Lee, you did have some communications issues, but I hope Dr. Rodriguez was able to hear enough to be able to respond to your question.
Yeah, thank you, Representative.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem. So thank you for the question, and certainly during January 6th, as I mentioned, FirstNet did operate consistently and reliably. We, at the time, U.S. Capitol Police was not on FirstNet. Again, any questions about getting them on or what the plan is to do that, I would have to refer to the Capitol Police for that. But I do know that following the 6th of January, we did sort of re-emphasize the importance of communication. of interoperability, but also operational planning. You'll recall just less than 3 weeks ago, there was a lot of concern over the September 18th protests that were coming to the district, and I know a lot of security was put up around the Capitol. Capitol Police did engage in an extensive interagency effort to make sure that both local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies were all on the same page. And we did institute and use at that time the National Capital Region's tactical plan, which allowed for interoperability across the radio channels, which really helped us. And so we learned a lot from January 6th in terms of communications, and we continue to work with our federal partners to make sure that we just keep refining and building out that capability.
So if I might, can you hear me? Would it be helpful that all of the components, including the Capitol Police, have FirstNet in a place that is so visited, so much potential target, and so much a singular entity, which is the capital of the United States, and certainly the home of the residents of the District of Columbia? How important is that to have that resource?
Yes, ma'am. I think it's very important. And any effort that drives us towards greater interoperability and coordination is always a good thing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield back. Well, go ahead. Go ahead, Director.
I would also just
Go ahead,
add
Director.
video. I would also just add that in addition to radio, video and data is also an important component of that as well.
The gentlewoman yields back. With that, I want to thank all of our witnesses for your invaluable testimony today and for your service every day. And I want to thank our members for their questions. Additionally, without objection, I would now like to submit a statement for the record from the Major Cities Chiefs Association. The members of the subcommittee may have we submit this statement for the record. Members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to these questions. Under committee rules, the subcommittee record shall be kept open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.